Okay, Dad, today is Wednesday, May 1st, and I'm going to be honest, I've been following the news the past
Right.
couple of days.
Well, there's one very important event that I hope you didn't forget.
What?
You owe me $10.
Oh, damn, that's right. Yes, I did forget. Okay, I'll be good on that. I'll pay up after. Um, but what's happened other than me losing the bet?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the big news. But yeah, of course, there's news coming from, I'd say, mainly from Ukraine. There continue to be indications that Russia is planning some sort of major offensive in the Kharkov region, of northeastern Ukraine. Yeah, just the other day, I think maybe it was yesterday, it was revealed that the Russians had built or were close to completing the construction of an air base very close to the Russian Kharkov border. And so this is just another piece of strong evidence that very strongly suggests that they are planning some kind of offensive. Of course, we've had the strikes on the power plants in Kharkov, or the city of Kharkov, which now is basically without power. Um, and what the television tower was in the middle of Kharkov city was struck
I
down.
saw that video.
Yeah,
Yeah,
rather
that
dramatic.
was a week ago or
That
so,
was about a
right?
week ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these things have, I mean, it's been going on for a while, but it just, when it all adds up to an, uh, an offensive in the near future. Now, of course, it's possible that this is, some sort of feint on the part of the Russians. It's, deceit is always a part of war. For example, before D-Day, the Allies did an awful lot. He spent a lot of money and made a tremendous effort to deceive the Germans, about their intended landing place.
Mm.
And it seems that they were largely successful. They wanted them to think that they were going to attack at Calais, and instead, they went to Normandy. But this is a different war. There are different technologies. So, though that's not impossible, it's also, I think, less likely that it's deceit. And the main reason is that with all the surveillance technologies that we have, from satellites and drones, it's it's impossible to, well nigh impossible to achieve some kind of strategic surprise.
Mm.
It's
People
just
can't
that,
hide like they did in World War
right,
II.
right.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, also, don't the Russians have such a large force now that even if they did amass what looks like an offensive coming from the Belgorod area into Kharkov, couldn't maybe the Ukrainians think, oh man, it's there, everyone's going to Kharkov. They pull over up all their
right,
troops from the south, and then they can just move in through the south, and
right,
then they still have the offensive capability up in Kharkov. They could do both, is what I'm saying,
right. Yeah,
right?
no,
So,
I
which
think
might
that's
happen,
that
right?
that's certainly possible. And also, another thing that's different about this war is that, in the past, these attacks would be concentrated on a certain point, or like an army would amass forces, in one place, and then and send them, at just to maybe a small part of the front, concentrated on that part of the front, and break through, and then
Mm.
then just pour in, more forces after that to exploit the breakthrough. And again, for the same reasons, because of the impossibility of achieving surprise. That does not seem to be how this war is being fought. You can't amass forces. One thing when you do, well, first of all, the enemy can see them, and they can know, so they know what you're doing, and they can
Mm.
prepare accordingly. And then also those concentrated forces become vulnerable to missile attacks. So what the Russians have been doing is that they've been pushing along the whole front and just always looking for weak points. And when they find one, they break through on the tactical level, with smaller numbers of men, and then exploit that. And now because Ukraine doesn't have the reserves that it used to have, it's got to move, forces from another part of the line, and then that becomes weak, and then the Russians exploit that. And I think that's what we're seeing more or less happening now. So if we're talking about a major new offensive, what I think it would mean is just like an extension of the line. For example, it might not be that they're going to like make um, just to drive towards the city of Kharkov. Just concentrate forces in one direction. What they call a big arrow offense, um, but they may just push along the whole line. They may just activate the whole Belgorod and Kursk borders, which border on Ukraine, and just push south from that. And by doing that, they increase the total line, um, battle lines by significantly, by hundreds of kilometers. And so the Ukrainians are, they'll have to, right. They are already spread thin down south. And if they just push along the entire line to the north, they're going to have to start pulling all kinds of, of units from the southern front and bring them up. And then they really are in danger of a total collapse, or at least collapses in certain parts of the line.
Well, what does this really mean for the city of Kharkov? I mean, and maybe actually, do the people in the city of Kharkov, are they viewing the Russian force as liberators or as conquerors?
I think in general, like the feelings, the majority are pro-Russian. Now, I don't know what's happened now. So many people have left Kharkov, but probably you have an even stronger, among those who remain, you have an even stronger pro-Russian, majority there.
But the pro-Ukrainian ones are probably scared,
right,
and leaving.
Right, and then also, actually, some Ukrainian officials and or military officers are commenting on that and just grumbling about the pro-Russian sentiment, like the ones they call them the Remainers or something. All the damn Remainers are all pro-Russian. So that's what we found. And incredibly, like in Avdiivka, there were still people there. There were still there that they lasted out the bombardment artillery, and then when the Russian soldiers came, they came out and waved flags and greeted them.
Wave flags, not a surrender flag.
Yeah,
a Russian flag.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's something that a lot of people just don't understand. That really kind of did view the Ukraine war as more of a civil war than anything. It's because most of these people in the eastern part of Ukraine are pro-Russian. They're Russian speaking. They're traditionally and culturally Russian.
Right.
And
a lot of the soldiers, especially in the early stages of the war, were in fact like Donbass militia, so technically Ukrainian.
Right.
And even like in the Avdiivka battle, the spearhead force was Donbass militia. So we're talking about Ukrainians. For them, it really mattered. This Avdiivka was this fortress city.
It was their city.
Right. It was their city. And it's also the Ukrainians were using it to lay siege to Donetsk. And it was one of the places from which they were, firing artillery on Donetsk city in order to terrorize the population. So, they have a real emotional investment.
They'd be like, these bastards blew up Pyotr's house,
right. Yeah. So that, Kharkov, the whole oblast of Kharkov is Russian speaking, and, it's always been Russian leaning. You can look back at the, before the 2014 coup, when there were elections held across Ukraine, you look at a map and there was a really obvious split between the East and the South on the one hand, and then the rest of the country. The East, which includes Kharkov, Donbass, and the South, which would be like Kherson, Zaporozhia, and Odessa. That always went for the Russian-leaning candidate. And you can just see the colors. It's a very stark contrast. So Kharkov has always been Russian-leaning.
I mean, Kharkov is a huge city, right? It's over 1 million people, right?
Second largest city in Ukraine.
Second, right? So it's a massive city. So how does a modern day siege of a huge metropolis look like? Because we've never had something like this, right?
Right. Nothing on this scale. I mean, we had Mariupol, which I think was. But it couldn't even be a tenth of the size of Kharkov.
Right. I mean, if this was Israel, then they would just carpet bomb it. Yeah. But obviously, the Russians, they want to preserve this city. This is their city. And they've shown that they do what they can to minimize civilian casualties. So will this be a fight, do you think, when they go into the city? Do you think they will actually be doing going from apartment building to apartment building? What type? Are we talking urban warfare? Because we haven't
because
really seen that since Bakhmut, I feel like.
right. Well, Avdiivka too. That
Okay,
was
but
even more
Avdiivka is different
That's
because
the,
they were bombing the crap out of it with glide
right,
bombs. They're not going to
right,
be doing that
right. And
here.
the civilian there were those remnants there,
Mm.
but the civilian population by and large had
Right. I
left.
think there were 1,000 people left
Right,
in Avdiivka.
right.
If Kharkov originally had a population of like 1.5 million, there's probably several hundred
Yeah,
thousand people still there.
right. And I think
They can't just do what they did to
right.
Avdiivka.
Yeah, Avdiivka was just 28,000 before the war. So yeah, we're talking about something about a couple orders of the
Yeah, I
magnitude
mean,
of difference.
even the person that looks after my son at the YMCA, she's from Kharkov. She's
Oh,
and
right,
she says Budava is Russian. She speaks Russian,
right.
So, um, yeah, it's a big city.
Yeah,
They
I don't
even
know.
end up in rural Tennessee. So,
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's really it's quite a challenge. It seems like both.
but also the
Yeah.
other thing is that if all the people with the citizens within Kharkov are pro-Russian and view them
Right.
as liberators, I think there might be a good if they start to see Russia move in,
Right.
then these people might rise up as well, and I think maybe the Ukrainians might just hightail and leave, or are they going to, or it descends into some really nasty.
Right. There are a lot of uncertainties here. This is imponderables. I'm sure that the Russians have been thinking long and hard about this. One thing is clear, like this air base. This is something that didn't start overnight. Something that they began building, many months ago, or possibly over a year ago. So
doesn't Belgorod have an air base?
Well, they do. And this isn't, and this new one is also in Belgorod, but it's just much closer to the front line. And some people like Dima of the Military Summary Channel, right, has said that he doesn't think it could be used in an offensive because it's too close to the front lines and close enough that the Ukrainians could shell it, with artillery. And he may be right, but either way, I think it still indicates that it's intended to use. I mean, that they're intending a major offensive. They're intending to take Kharkov. Maybe they're not going to use it in the initial stages, but it's there, for use once they've pushed the Ukrainians back a certain distance. Otherwise, why do you build it?
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see how the capture of Kharkov plays out. Because I've also thought about that. I'm like, how do you, in modern day, how do you capture a huge city like that? How does it work? It's not like
ideally, it's political and you
negotiate.
And maybe there's, that's what happened. Like when this, people generally think of the SMO, the Special Military Operations, really have to have been bungled, to have been a failure. But if you stop and think about it, well, there were the negotiations that were torpedoed by the Western powers, and that almost happened. So, it almost succeeded in that sense. But also in the South, places like Kherson and Zaporozhye, the Russians very quickly took those. And again, it was actually political. I mean, it was just certain leaders defected, army units defected, and they had it.
Right.
And so there's very little fighting, and they simply took it.
So that could be a possibility. Right. The people that are maybe in charge of Kharkov are still have some connection as Russians or Kharkov, and they might be kind of against their will.
What I understand is that actually the Russians thought that they were going to get Kharkov, during the very early stages of the SMO. They had been, I guess, that the Ukrainians had gotten wind of their plans and had sabotaged them. Like whoever it was that was supposed to hand the keys over to the city, they locked that guy up and replaced him with somebody loyal. Actually, the Russians weren't aware of the situation, and I think some other troops came in with, without, proper vigilance and were ambushed. But who knows? Maybe they'll succeed this time.
Well, what will it mean for the war after Kharkov falls to the Russians and the Russians capture? Does this mean? I mean, obviously, it's a big victory for Russia, but does this spell the end or near the end?
Well, it's the second largest city, so it would be a major blow that just cannot be covered up. I mean, so much of the Western media when Russia took Avdiivka or or like recently Ocheretino. Okay, these are small places. They're strategically important. They're small, but so they can still be ignored. But they're not going to be able to ignore the capture of Kharkov if that
And
happens.
after Kharkov,
And
would
so,
probably Odessa might go next, right? Do you think that's
well,
possible? Because you're
yeah,
saying that it sounds like the strategy for Putin and the Russians is to just capture all the parts of Ukraine
right,
that identify that want to
right,
be part of
right,
Russia.
right.
So,
Well,
and
you
you
can
just
say
said
one thing,
Odessa
yeah,
wants to be
right,
so.
right. I mean, and then Odessa has like just the other. I think just last night there was another major strike on Odessa. There is a resistance. There's known to be a resistance organization within Odessa working with the Russians.
Hmm.
And so, one reason that these strikes have been so devastatingly effective is that they're providing on the ground intelligence. Like they're holding a meeting right now.
Hmm.
The foreign mercenaries are in this building, that kind of thing. So, yeah, Odessa, too, is remember, there are a lot of people who are waiting who really want to kick the Ukrainian authorities out. Odessa is where that horrible fire occurred. 50 people were burned alive while the Ukrainian nationalists outside jeered, and that
Wait,
happened.
wait, wait. Explain.
Yeah, that was back in 2014. I believe it was around the time of the coup, in the immediate aftermath of the coup,
So,
and
wait,
because there was,
what
cause,
happened?
yeah, there were some Russians, or Russian speakers there that were, um, you know, demonstrating against the coup,
Hmm.
and they ended up, being just retreating into, I think it was like a workers' union building, something like that, and the Ukrainian nationalists set fire to it, and 50 people burned to death. Other people were leaping out of the windows, and they were outside jeering. And
My
so
God.
that's actually when Putin launched the SMO. Is that part of it is that he wanted,
Avenge.
yeah, he wanted to track down these people and bring them to justice.
It's crazy.
So yeah, and he has said, Putin has said recently, like within the last few months, and he said it more than once. Odessa is a Russian city. It was a city founded by Catherine
So
the Great.
Odessa is going to go too.
I think so. Yeah.
So okay,
Right.
but so
But that's the one that actually that could be even bigger. And though it's a smaller city, it may be strategically even more important than the city of Kharkov.
it's on the Black Sea, right?
Because it's on the Black Sea, and if the Russians take Odessa, they pretty much right there they have deprived Ukraine of access to the sea. Ukraine will become what's left of Ukraine will be a landlocked country, and that's why I think you hear like Macron and other Western leaders saying, Odessa must not fall. We're going to send our troops to Odessa. There are rumors about that, but
it's so crazy to think, how the Ukrainians are losing so much just because they refuse to negotiate. They've lost so much just life,
right,
manpower. Hundreds of thousands of their own citizens have died,
right,
or their soldiers have
right.
died. Millions have fled, and they're just going to lose so many territories. They're going to lose Kharkov, the second largest city. Odessa is that number three, or it's up
Yeah,
there anyways. One of the big city.
and strategically extremely important. Right,
Yeah, and they could have avoided all of this, and the longer they wait, they're just going to lose more. So
right. Well, it's just a story of this unholy alliance between the West, the Americans in particular, and the extremist elements within Ukraine. I mean, because if you look back, like almost at every stage, like when the idea of Ukraine joining NATO, when that idea was first put out there, um, polls were taken, and there was a very solid majority of Ukrainians who were against it.
hmm.
But it's and there was, even when Zelensky was elected, he was elected on a peace platform, and part of it was okay, we make peace with the Russians, the Minsk Accords, and all that. But again and again, it's you have these extremist elements, and if they were on their own, if the U.S. and the other Western powers did not support them, I mean, it seems like quite possible, likely, that the center in Ukraine would have held the moderate center, and they would have negotiated. But it was just like one thing is that these extreme nationalists could always say is like, well, we got the U.S. behind us. It's just when they it, So, without the U.S., you say, look, this is crazy. We can't do that. You can get out of here, But it's just like, hey, but we've got the U.S. behind us, and they say it's going to, they say they're going to make it happen. And so they would win these arguments again and again. And the U.S., it was always kind of,
made something happen.
Yeah, they certainly did. But in the end, it's been a disaster because the thing is, like, a lot of these countries don't understand. It's not, first of all, the U.S. doesn't really even understand your country very well. Russia understands your country. They speak your language. They have a shared history, whatever. The U.S. doesn't even understand your country. And then second, the U.S. has its own interests, and it really doesn't have anything to do with the welfare of your country. It's about, in this case, hurting Russia. And this, it's a story that's played out again and again in different places around the world with disastrous results. And it may very well play out in Taiwan too.
I feel like what I said before about Ukraine turning on its Western handlers, turning on the U.S., I feel like that's going to happen. I just don't know when.
Right, it could happen, but it's got to be.
I'm wanting to turn against the U.S., and I'm just going through it vicariously, just from learning about what's happening in Ukraine. It's like,
well, you see, there is increasing bitterness within Ukraine. There's increasing resistance to conscription, and that's one of they recently passed this mobilization bill, right? But they're still not, they're not finding the guys. The guys are, anybody, every Ukrainian male is basically hiding in a basement or trying to get across the border now. And they're finding it very, very hard to bring these people. And again, what if they do conscript them? How
they're not going to be great fighters.
Right,
their heart's not in it.
Right. The people that were Ukrainian patriots that believed in the cause, and most of them are dead now. And the ones
that'll
that remain,
kill a cause.
Yeah. So it looks very grim. So anyway, there's obvious resistance. I think you don't find. Well, there's still a lot of fear. The thing is, you don't know how many Ukrainians are thinking, "Hey, we chose the wrong side in this." Maybe a lot of them are, but they can't express it. I mean, it's a dangerous thought to express. It was even dangerous, before the war began. Again, like, one of your sister's best friend is Ukrainian, and her family fled Ukraine before the war, because her father was very vocal about, what he thought about the government and the turn away from Russia towards the West. And they were threatened, and they left. And that's actually a very common story. But now it's very, very dangerous to express any sort of pro-Russian sentiment. You can be killed or, locked up. So it's hard to know exactly what Ukrainians are thinking.
Well, that makes me feel like more and more people will be viewing the Russian forces as liberators, at least in the East.
I think there's no question in the East and the South. And that's, the Russians don't want to rule over people that are foreign to them and will hate them. So, they have no incentive to go into Western Ukraine.
That's actually just a very basic common sense concept, like, that this is, why did Ukraine, when all these Eastern provinces, said like, no, we're not going to be part of this, and they declared their independence, and Ukraine wanted so hard to control this population and shelled them for 10 years, killing civilians nonstop for 10 years on and off.
Right. And of course, these people are going to hate you.
Yeah, right. But that's what I'm saying. It's like you're creating hatred and danger and potential terrorism and all these things.
Well, what's terrorism?
Yeah. Well, on behalf of, but I'm saying potentially blowback down the road. Like, even if Russia never came in, it's like, okay, then your goal is what? You're going to just try to blow these people up until the next 10 years until they love you? And
you always say, they didn't. Well, the thing is, they knew they weren't going to love them.
So they were wanting to provoke a war?
It's very important to point out that this was policy. This wasn't just a few rogue guys with artillery pieces. It was constant. It was observed. Again, by the OSCE observers too, over the course of 10 years, this constant shelling of the.
So did the U.S. want the Russia to invade the eastern part of Ukraine? Was that always the plan?
I think they. Yeah. Well, or or maybe, I mean, it seems like there was a lot of reasons to think that Ukraine was intending to attack Russia, and actually Russia just struck first.
Well, that's
But
crazy. Why
yeah,
would Ukraine would attack Russia?
yeah. Well, and not exactly. They wouldn't say it was Russia. I mean,
They would attack Crimea.
yeah, Donetsk and then
Donetsk.
Crimea, right? Donbass and then Crimea. Yeah. Well,
So that was our big plan.
yeah. Well, it seems like, I mean, see, if you go back, remember before the SMO began, before, there were couple months leading up to it, there were a lot of, we were getting these constant warnings. The Russians are getting ready to attack. And frankly, I didn't believe, because it's like the boy who cried wolf too often, right?
Mm.
But before that, you were getting lots of reports that the Ukrainians were building up their forces, and it looked like they were getting ready to attack. So we were. It wasn't clear who was going to strike first, and in fact, you could even say that the Ukrainians struck first, but just a few days before the SMO began, and actually even before Russia declared the Donbass republics to be independent states. The Ukrainians just sharply increased their artillery barrage. I mean, it wasn't like it went up 50%; it went up like 300% or 500% up until the SMO, and it seems like they were getting ready to launch an attack. And I kind of wish that the Russians let them do it, and then you could have moral clarity. There's sort of a lack of moral clarity, especially at the beginning. But maybe, I don't understand the military aspect of it. Because one thing is, by Russians attacking first, they were able to basically wipe out the Ukrainian Air Force in just a very short period of time, during the first couple of days. And the Ukrainian Navy, it was just gone, in those first days. So that gave them a big advantage. And then,
yeah. The more I learn about it, just the kind of the grosser the whole thing gets. It's just kind of this sick, sadistic thing where the United States just used Ukraine. We overthrew their elected government in 2014. That was the first kind of big kind of like poof, when you understand that, like, oh, we orchestrated this Maidan coup. And we were actually, our politicians were on the ground there in Kiev. We had Victoria Nuland
passing out cookies.
Right.
But more than that, we got her, on tape talking about who they were going to put in power. And
so the whole thing is just, there's no denying that, denying that.
Yeah, it was right. It's kind of like the most transparent coup in the history of the world.
Right. Because it's on tape, and you can hear Victoria Nuland talking to the ambassador about who would put in power.
Right. And then, the thing is, like, when the coup occurred, I mean, Ukraine became, you could say, just an American puppet immediately. So several of the top officials in the government were actually U.S. citizens, including the finance minister. Yeah. And then you had, Hunter Biden, on the board of Burisma, right? And then there was Burisma was obviously a very corrupt company, and when the Ukrainian public prosecutor tried to investigate, well, Biden came and had him fired.
And that's on tape too. You can see a video. And I said, like, all right, if you don't want your $1 billion, I'm hopping the plane until you fire that prosecutor.
Right.
It's on tape, and people laugh about it.
Yeah. And then again, immediately, this is again comes from the New York Times, really, and therefore from the CIA itself. It was immediately after that coup, before anything. The CIA established those bases along the Russian border.
So this was drawn up, and actually, Biden has his fingerprints all over this, because this was kind of what he was doing as vice president, right? It seems like he's had this obsession with Ukraine for a long time,
right?
And so he's not going to let go of it.
No,
it's just good, but it's just blown up in his face so badly.
Right.
It is just such a gross thing to think that what we did to this country and to these people. And now the country is dying, quite literally, they've lost, they're going to lose half the territory. They're going to lose half of their people.
Right.
Imagine.
It could have been like Czechoslovakia. Right. They had an amicable separation.
Yeah.
Okay. The Slovaks here, because it was actually the same kind of stark division in the country.
Yeah, I've seen that map. It's straight, one side is white, one side is black.
It's not like it's all kind of mixed together in the middle. No, it's very It's a very clear cut line of division. Based on history and ethnicity and it would have been to the benefit of both. I mean, in the end, if Ukraine, you want to have your Ukrainian identity, you don't want to be associated with the Russians, then why do you have to rule over millions of Russians? And
Right.
at the end, it's not to your benefit. You want to be Ukrainians in the
Right.
Ukrainian part of the country. It would have been, again, obviously the just and humane solution to the problem.
Yeah, I just how we fight with proxies. The idea that we just had this idea of wanting to weaken Russia, so we just offer up Ukraine like a sacrificial
Yeah.
lamb, almost.
Right.
And then let's hope that they do some damage to the Russians. Of
Right.
course, it backfired.
Right.
Now Russia is stronger than it's ever been before. That's what we did.
Well, yeah. I mean, you see it. Yeah, no, it is rather horrifying, and it's quite obvious. I mean, it's become quite explicit. Ukrainians need to die for this cause. Now, there are all these Ukrainian refugees in Western European countries. The ones that are in Russia, and never forget, like the one country that received the most refugees was actually Russia. People never talk about that, but a lot of people fled in that direction. They're safe, but the ones in Europe, the men, are now subject to conscription. I mean, that's what
we touched on that.
Yeah, right. That's what the European states and the Ukrainian authorities.
Do you think they're actually going to bust them back? They're not going to. Come on, like if somebody's going to go to my apartment and I'm a Ukrainian refugee,
yeah,
like I'm not going down without kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
And how hard are the Polish authorities going to work, or maybe the Poles don't like them. I've heard there's some tension with the Poles.
I think the Poles would be eager to get them out of there. To be honest, it could. Who knows? I mean, it's not. The old Europe would not have done that, but this I don't know. I just wouldn't put anything past the new Europe. They just might. We'll see.
Such an awful mess.
Yeah.
Do you want to move to another mess?
Well, one thing. This is also about Ukraine, but it's a different aspect of it. It was just because I just saw this statistic today that it really struck me, and I think it's worth pondering. We've talked about there's always an economic aspect to war. Actually, it's a very important aspect. One of the reasons why the U.S. proved victorious in World War II is that we had this tremendous, manufacturing economy that in the end, just overwhelmed, our opponents, the tanks and the battleships and whatever. They just kept on coming. But excuse me. The U.S. of today is not the U.S. of 1941. First, we don't have the manufacturing. We've transferred a lot of our manufacturing base to other countries, and then also, we were in much stronger fiscal condition. In 1941, our debt to GDP ratio was 49% in 1941, and it shot up to 119%. Approximately, maybe 115%. After the war began, over the next 4 years, over the course of the war. But that was, financed by war bonds. And when everybody understood this was a temporary thing. Right. We're going into debt because you got to win this war. Then we'll pay it back after the war. And that's what happened. Mm-hmm. The debt shot way up and went way up I think it was 119%. And then after the war ended, it dropped, and it dropped precipitously. Over the next few years, we returned to that very sane level, like 49%. But the U.S. today has a higher debt to GDP ratio than right now, before beginning any major war, than we did in 1945. Mm-hmm. It's 123% now. It's higher. So we would be starting a war if we actually if World War III in fact does break out. We're going to be starting that at a higher debt to GDP ratio. That's to say, a higher level of indebtedness than we were in 1941. Right. And then we don't have the manufacturing base. Now, to compare this to Russia, before the war broke out, their debt to GDP ratio was just a minuscule 19%, and it's not much higher than that now. And so they just had. Apparently they had the manufacturing capacity. We didn't believe it, but clearly they did. And then they just have a very solid, fiscal position. I mean, their economy, can can carry them through, a major war, a world war. And I don't know that ours can, even though, you look on paper, ours is how many times bigger than
Right.
theirs is.
Well, yeah, we talked about that a little bit before about the difference, with wars today is that we just finance them with the printing press, and we're really the only country that can really get away with it to that level. The European Union, the Euro can a bit as well, but I think that's a big reason why a country like Russia isn't going to have these issues because they don't have the world reserve currency like we do,
Right.
where we can
And they
just
also, they have the recent experience of a, economic disaster, which was the 1990s.
mm,
It's just sort of like for the Germans, the Weimar Republic experience of hyperinflation just has made the Germans, even, generations later, they're still just very, very averse to, inflation.
mm,
And they just never want to go through that again. And I think it's just that Russians had a similar experience in the 1990s. So you say, yeah, we're not going deeply in debt. We're playing it safe. We're going to go the cautious route. And
right. Yeah, well, for the U.S., I mean, do you think we're looking at a potentially hyperinflation coming here? I feel like we're already starting to see some dark clouds on the horizon on our economy.
right.
Markets are starting to tank. They're looking a little bit wobbly. We got inflation. Interest rates are
Yeah.
still high. $35 trillion in debt. We talked about this so many times. We don't
Yeah.
have to go into debt
Yeah.
in depth about it, but that is this other huge
Right.
problem that's just
Right.
lingering
And
in the
I think
background.
right. Anyway, we've talked about it before. I don't think we need to go into it again, but just, just bring that in and just understand that that's the context for a possible world war.
Right.
We are not in an economic position. We've already talked about military production, but just our larger economy is not really,
Right. We're going to try to, if we do gear up for a real wartime economy in our current economic state,
Yeah.
we'll try to put our foot on the gas pedal and the whole thing will just blow up.
Right.
Right. It can't move forward the way it is now.
Right.
So if we try to, I think
Right.
we'll see economic forces really starting to tear things apart.
Right. Well, you think about it, like went from 49% to 119% in World War II. So that was more than doubled, approximately like 2.5 times. But we're at 123%. You're going to double that. You got 250%, and that's just absurd. There's no country that can survive that. It would destroy the currency.
Right.
I think long before we reach that.
Okay, well that's fun.
Yeah, I guess one thing else I came across. Now we can shift over to the Mideast. That I don't know if you saw the news, but the Israelis announced that they were mothballing their Patriot air defense systems.
Mothballing?
Yeah,
because there's too many moths in them.
No, okay, well, mothballing. It says they're just
getting rid of them.
Yeah, basically they're just going to put them in the in the warehouses.
I was like, what moths are becoming a problem here?
Yeah. So it's just a statement that they don't serve any. They've decided that they don't serve any purpose, and they're just going to retire them. When you say mothball, well, okay, if somewhere down the road, maybe we could use them, but we just don't see a use for them now. So that. Well, that's first very interesting. That's another blow to the prestige of this very, very important system, the extremely expensive one.
Do we have an alternative air defense system, or is it really only the Patriot defense system?
Yeah, that's
all we hear about.
Right. There is a Aegis system, which is ship-based. But yeah, that's the only one. Okay, let's see. Is there? I mean, there's some older systems. Like I think the Hawk that goes like back to the 1970s or something, and actually we begin with the Ukrainians, but there's just that's worthless.
Okay, well if you're searching that far,
yes, basically no, that's supposed to be our best.
And now they're shooting mothballs out of them.
Yeah, well, right. Okay, but anyway, so I found that very interesting. I mean, first of all, again, it's a blow to the prestige of this, of our crown jewel of the air defense. And there have been many blows to its prestige recently, with significant consequences, both financial and so let's say,
So you're saying that Israel they publicly stated that they're not going to be using these anymore?
Right. But that's the other thing is the fact that they made this public. I'm going to have to find it. I don't know what official said this, but that in itself is interesting. Why would they do that? Yeah. I mean, it may be sort of a shot across the bow at, the Biden administration. Okay, if you start like pushing us too hard on this or whatever, we can do things we can say things that can hurt you. We know stuff.
Is the Iron Dome comprised of Patriot
No,
systems? Like,
well,
what is?
okay. What I understand is that it's similar and based on it. It's that it's sort of a it's it's maybe the Patriot adapted to just to local conditions. That's something I need to move. That's what it's a similar system.
But
And
they're not mothballing the Iron Dome.
no, right now I don't know. It may be that the Iron Dome is no better. Again, I think I mentioned this analysis done by the MIT professor Theodore Postal. He could not find any evidence that any Iron Dome missiles brought down any of the incoming drones and missiles from Iran.
I thought so. Even the drones they didn't bring down. I thought it was like
Yeah.
just the ballistic missiles.
I think it was both.
So then,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
so,
like
then,
the
so you're
drones
saying
were-
that it didn't bring down anything.
Yeah, because the drones, basically were brought down by, maybe I should say, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles.
Maybe you
There
should just say what did the Iron Dome bring down?
Yeah, well, I'll double check it, but as I remember it, he didn't see any evidence that it brought anything down.
So
Nothing. Yeah, right, exactly.
That's huge.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, no, again, he's just dealing with things that are here, that are publicly accessible to him. These videos that are taken. So, that doesn't mean that it didn't bring down anything. There may be some, certainly they're going to be. And not the entire sky that night was covered by amateur photographers.
Yeah. So maybe it intercepted some, but very.
It couldn't be too many because he could not see that. So it may be that like the Israelis decided because they have invested a lot in this Iron Dome. It's something that they it's a big selling point. It's important to the Israeli public. And say, we've got you protected. But they may too, I don't know how if they sell it to other countries, but they may also just say, hey, there's a lot of questions now about our air defense system. Let's sacrifice the American part of it and say that's the crappy part that didn't work. Because, we want to sell our own technology. That may be part of what's behind this. I don't know. But that's just something we can explore more later to see if we can figure out what's going on. I just found that news to be very interesting. The fact that they're doing it and the fact that they're saying that they're doing it, I think both of those are definitely worth noting.
Basically, what I'm understanding, if that's what you say, it's true. Then it seems like then most of all the air defense that Israel experienced was from aircraft.
Yeah,
and ships,
well, that's
right.
Well, that's what again Theodore Postal said.
Who's this Theodore Postal?
Okay, he's the MIT professor of basically missile technology.
Okay,
so he is a real expert.
Okay,
this
so
is what he's done
not just
all his life.
Some guy on the internet.
Yeah, sometimes these guys on the internet can be very smart and figure things, but he is a legitimate expert. Somebody he's credentialed and he's been studying these kind of things all his life, and so what he says really does mean something. Well, what he said was that again, based on the videos that he looked at, which was every video he could find, every intercepted drone, and I think maybe missile too. I think cruise missiles. I don't know if he saw any. I don't think he saw any ballistic missiles intercepted, but those were probably out of range of the videos. Every interception was owing to an air-to-air missile. In other words, a missile launched by Israeli, U.S., French, British aircraft.
Okay, interesting. You kind of think like the audacity of the Israelis or just the sheer recklessness of them if they know that like, hey, we didn't get anything with our air defense system, but let's go ahead and carpet bomb the crap out of these Gazans, try to piss off the Iranians some more, and maybe start World War III. We have no air defense, but maybe America will nuke Iran for us. I mean, what is what's the thinking? It's just so
it's very reckless,
so absurd.
Yeah, like, it's rather you could say reckless or even apocalyptic kind of thinking.
Yeah,
I mean, it really is.
Well, that's actually the framework you have to have with when dealing with Israelis. Is to they're an apocalyptic element to it.
Right. No, you have to say that. There's no question about it. I mean, it's just there's all this talk about the the red heifer and the the third temple, and then with the Christian Zionists backing them, on that, and here in this country. But that's just one aspect of it. That's the openly religious part. But then there are plenty of secular people that are equally crazy
Yeah,
in
that's kind of
Israel.
strange that the secular people would be so into it too.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like,
They may have no interest in the red heifer, but they're interested in escalation and like finishing off Iran once and for all. And that's, just equally crazy. It's in the end, they support the same policies.
okay, well, yeah, we'll be monitoring, see what happens. I mean, do you think what's the do we see a Rafah invasion occurring now? I mean,
Yeah,
what's
well, everything indicates that that's going ahead. That's going to happen soon.
so
That's
okay?
why that's
Nothing's
in
really
your
happened so far.
right.
Just the
Well,
normal,
yeah, carnage and
yeah,
right.
awful mass
Yeah,
murder is
right.
going on day
Families
to day.
being, entire families being wiped out and all that, and people starving. I mean, that's continues. But it looks like they're going into Rafah.
Okay, I wanted to just ask you a little bit about what's happening here in America, real quick, just in terms of these protests that we're seeing and just infringements on free speech. How we talked about it a little bit in
Yeah.
that one podcast, but I was just thinking about it a bit more. I'm like, how serious is this? This whole how much threat is our constitution under right now, or the idea of freedom of speech? Is it really? Have we seen anything being suppressed so quickly and forcefully before? Like, where's this going to go? Like,
Yeah. Well,
I know it's kind of a
yeah.
tough, broad question.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I
Who
haven't
knows where it's going
phrased
to
it
go?
very well, the
Yeah.
question, but
Well. Okay. I think it's quite significant in that we haven't seen the last of it. I think that probably again a lot of people have been on these campuses have been shocked and radicalized by the response. They just never. You can just see that on the faces of some of these professors and students that are just being hurled to the ground. It's like what they just never. What's going on? And then I'm they cannot. I don't think that these maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these students are just so career obsessed and so soft or whatever. They're going to back down, but I think there's a definite possibility that they are going to redouble their efforts, and they're if they were angry before, they're twice as angry now.
right.
And like having the Mike Johnson and Biden condemn them as anti-Semites. I mean, some of the language is just so crazy, and the students know it's crazy because they just know it's not true. Everybody there knows it's not true. That the entire this is to use that phrase that's generally used for the dissident right, but I think you could apply it here. It's like a red pilling kind of experience. Like you kind of thought that okay, yeah, there are problems with the system and et cetera, but more or less, they like the mainstream media, they tell the truth. They got to look at this and say they're just all lying. It's like they're saying Mike Johnson was just, I think was it yesterday, saying that they're calling for the extermination of the Jews and whatever. It's just beyond absurd.
Right, or I hear them saying like they know Hamas putting babies in ovens and raping
right.
people, but no evidence of this has ever been
Yeah,
shown.
right. Here's saying about the protesters themselves, right. And they know that it's not true. Yeah. And then you have, but it's not just like the Republicans, but it's also the Democratic establishment. It's Biden. It was the mayor of New York City. Who sent in the cops and just like made this huge show of force, stormed the Columbia campus last night. And I think that's going to, I don't think it's going to put an end to things. I think it's like adding fuel to fire.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is because conservatives have always kind of backed the boys in blue and authority, and there's been more and more frustration and resentment towards higher education, towards universities, especially from the right, and for valid reasons.
Yeah, no, I understand
saw how
that.
much craziness has happened, and so I think kind of just sort of the knee-jerk reaction to this is those college kids are at it again.
Right.
Those woke professors. I'm sick and tired of their nonsense. Send in the National Guard.
Yeah.
And a lot of I think people are just kind of behind that sentiment.
I think that's probably true. Yeah.
But it's clearly when you think about it, it's just thinking that these people are protesting peacefully, and then you have straight up SWAT military people in military gear coming down,
right.
and you see the videos beating people up, huge force. It's like this is kind of what all these liberal college professors and students were always talking about, fascist and
Right.
authoritarianism, and
You
they
made
have
it.
it. You made it happen.
You made it
You did
happen.
it. You
Exactly.
showed them that they were
Right.
right in this case, because that is an authoritarian fascist response
Right.
to a peaceful protest on. Sure, you may not like their woke garbage ideology, but you can't just
Right.
send in the National Guard. These people are protesting, and for once they're protesting about something that actually really matters,
Right.
where people are that they have, these people have a heart, and that's why they're protesting,
Right.
is because they see what is
Right.
happening.
Yeah.
in
No,
the
no, I
college.
can understand why they protest. It just you.
I mean, I would
Right.
probably be out there
Yeah,
protesting
I think
if was in
I would
college.
too. I know. I mean, it's just like you hear some of these stories, you see some of these images, and it's just
That's
it's really hard to deal with, and you just feel like I got to do something.
Right, but
That's right. It's not. It's just like, okay, it's just one sob story, but it's just happening on such a huge scale, and our government is highly complicit in it.
They're almost doing it at the
Right.
whim of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, and right, and also, this crackdown immediately followed Ben Netanyahu's speech about the
Stop anti-Semitism.
right.
now.
You got to do something now, right? Exactly. Calling on federal, state, and local authorities in the U.S. to put an end to this.
Right, a foreign power telling us
and then
not
like
to
the next
suppress free
day,
speech.
bam, they were in there.
I mean, that's why I was just kind of thinking at first. I was like, oh, there's always some protests and these things happening, but then I started realizing, like, these are nonviolent protests, and we sent out the National Guard and local police so quickly to quell this,
Yeah.
which was such a basic right as an American, is the right to protest, the right to free speech, and it was just so quickly squashed. Has it
Yeah.
ever? Did anybody expect that to happen? Is there anything comparable in history? I know we had the
Right,
Vietnam
right.
War protests, but that's different still, because we were actively in that war. It seemed like that those protests built up over time, but there wasn't such a. I don't think
Right,
there
I
was
think
such
it
a quick crackdown like this.
Right.
Like,
I don't think it was that fast. And then also it contrasts very sharply with like the police reaction to the George Floyd protests, of a couple of years ago, where a lot of, in many cases, it's not like the police never did anything and didn't arrest anyway. They certainly did arrest a certain high number of people, but these protests were very violent, and they were very widespread, and there
lots
were a lot
of property damage,
right, a lot
people
of
getting hurt,
buildings being burned down, even a police precinct, and the police standing by and just watching it happen. So it just seemed like there really is a contrast between
right. So here you have an actual violent protest that was
Right.
kind of played down by the media. They said mostly peaceful protest.
Right.
We won't send in anybody. We'll just kind of let it play
Yeah,
out.
here is a
And
truly
here,
peaceful
a truly peaceful protest on
Right.
college campuses.
Right.
And then they put snipers on the roof. They send in, people on horseback and, straight up SWAT teams to beat up these kids and professors. And then you have that coupled with also the fact that now we are ordered TikTok to divest, another huge suppression of free speech as well, just to completely remove a social media platform based on the same reason as well, under the guise of that somehow these platforms or these protests are leading to anti-Semitism, without any self-reflection and realizing that, hey, maybe the so-called rise in anti-Semitism has to do what Israel is doing. Right. Maybe we should.
But it seems like
maybe genocide is a leading cause of anti-Semitism.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the approach that's being taken is to continue with the genocide and violently suppress protests against the genocide. If you want anti-Semitism to happen, that's the policy to pursue. I mean, it's just going to make a lot of people very, certainly angry at the Zionists, but it's kind of hard for people being people to, to keep, I can keep that limited just to, Zionist Jews. I mean,
right. I can see this getting larger and blowing up here in the United States, these protests, because a lot of people on the right, the conservatives, I see the language being used on places like Fox News. They are basically labeling these people that are protesting as terrorists. They're saying they're Hamas supporters. They never frame them as people that are protesting the genocide or what's happening in Gaza. They basically have labeled the Palestinian, is it Kifia,
Yeah.
as a terrorist symbol, and if you have that type of rhetoric, that these are straight up terrorists, then you have to use the force.
Right.
It's justified because we're battling terrorism.
Right.
And
Well, I'm
this
sure
is
that's what, like, those cops that came in
that's
and
what they thought.
realized that's probably their heads are filled with those ideas.
Right.
They think
They're
really
going home and watching Fox News, and they're
right.
thinking like, I got to do my duty and save my country from
Right.
this terrible woke mind
Right.
virus. These terrorist kids are
Right.
now infiltrated our institution.
Right.
It's like it was bad enough when the transgenders infiltrated. Now they got straight up terrorists infiltrated.
You're right. Right.
That's I'm sure that's what they're thinking.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think you're right.
But this also just creates another huge, fissure, huge rift in our society.
Right.
We were talking about this before with the demonization of Donald Trump. Comparing everything he does as to Hitler, and that he's this biggest threat to democracy.
Right.
And it's the same type of rhetoric that creates.
Right.
You use this type of language, then it provides no real way, or makes the way forward very difficult to have any type of healing, bringing the two
compromise,
sides, right,
meeting of the minds. It's polarized,
right? It's just exactly. You're using the words I'm trying to explain. Right, it's become so polarized that compromise becomes nigh impossible.
Right,
and now we have this. Not only do we have the whole issue with the election being so polarized, now we have the issue in Gaza and these protests also being so polarized that I just don't see compromise. And it's frustrating because I'm also I'm on different camps on this. Like I have my own view on each one of these individually. I hate that it's kind of become so tribal, partisan.
Yeah. Well, in the end, it doesn't hold together. It's not there's let's say insanity on both sides of the line. There's derangement on both sides. And that's an unfortunate fact about American politics, which makes hope for some sort of a real solution for a new regime, a new establishment in this country that's sane and that'll truly improve the lives of the people here and improve relations with other countries. Just you don't see it anywhere. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have a sensible program.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
No, but it's the thing to remember is people like us, that express this sort of, let's say, combination of views may be considered sort of like oddballs in this country. Don't fall into either camp, but you go into other countries and you'll find the rest of the world, the global majority, and you'll find it, I think, in general, a lot easier to talk to people. A lot of people, it's a general framework is not fringe. It's not oddball in the global majority. It's just in this very weird part of the world that's called the collective West.
You're making me regret moving back to America. Okay, well, I think we can end it there. We'll see what happens.
Okay, something always interesting happens.
Yeah, good negative, gloomy conversation as always.
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dad.